But with Hashem's help, we will learn today Yevamos Daf Mem Gimel. We left off yesterday on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud. So we were speaking about Rabbi Bohu, who was walking, leaning on the shoulder of Rav Nachum, who was his helper, and Rav Nachum asked of Rabbi Bohu regarding the concept of machlokes v'achar kach stam v'achar kach machlokes, as we explained yesterday, that when Rebbe ordered the Mishnayos, the rule is, whenever he discussed a halacha in which there is an argument, and he recorded the argument in Mishnayos, if subsequent to the recording of the machlokes, in that Mishnah, in that Masechta, or at least in that Seder, Rebbe rewrites this halacha without quoting both sides, by simply quoting one opinion and not attributing the author of that opinion. In other words, he writes an anonymous Mishnah. So the halacha is that the Rebbe wrote it anonymously to tell you that the halacha is like that opinion. In reverse, if Rebbe wrote first an anonymous opinion and subsequently in that Seder in the Mishnayos, Rebbe quoted two sides to that argument, he quotes the machlokes, so then the halacha is not like the anonymous opinion. This is what's known. What Rav Nachum asked Rabbi Bohu is what happens if you have a stam, if you have a anonymous Mishnah, and in a Braisa you have a machlokes. So to this, Rabbi Bohu tells Rav Nachum that im Rebbe lo shana or im Rebbe lo shana is Rab Chia minayin lo. In other words, the author of the Braisas were the students of Rebbe. If Rebbe wrote a Stam Mishnah implying that the halacha is like that opinion, so then we will not take into account that being discussed in a Braisa in a way of a machlokes, because once Rebbe paskin, then it must be a non-authoritative Braisa. But if in reverse, if in the Mishnayos there is a machlokes, and there is a Stam Mishnah, then the halacha is like the Stam Mishnah, because that is what counts, Rebbe writing an anonymous din, implying that this is the halacha. So for that question, machlokes in a Braisa, and that being written in a Stam Mishnah, and Rabbi Bohu tells Rav Nachum that the halacha is kistam, the Gemara challenges Amar Lei. So Rav Nachum asked Rabbi Bohu, I will show you a place where in the Braisa you have a machlokes, and in the Mishnah there's a Stam Mishnah. And nevertheless, we all know that the halacha is not like the Stam Mishnah, so that's going to be a question against this statement of Rabbi Bohu, machlokes beBraisa. And then there's a Stam Mishnah that Rabbi Bohu says halacha kistam, and we'll see that it's not so in the following case. Hotanan, we learn the Mishnah. In Masechtas Kelim, Masrek shel Pishton, if you have a comb that was made to comb out flax. The comb that we are talking about is a wooden comb. The teeth of the comb are metal teeth. Normally by wooden utensils there's a rule that pshutei kle'etz are not susceptible to become tamei, are not susceptible to become impure. Being that the teeth of a comb the teeth is the main part of the comb, so when the teeth is made out of metal, so then we don't give this utensil a category of a wooden utensil or a flatware utensil. The teeth, which is the main part of the keli, makes the keli considered a metal keli. A metal keli is susceptible to become tamei. What is the question? The question is, what happens if some of the teeth are missing? There has to come a point where the functionality of the keli is no longer there because of its lack of teeth. And when that happens, then that keli is not susceptible to become tamei because it's no longer a keli, because it's not functional. So the Mishnah says that Masrik shel Pishtan, that when you have a comb that was made to comb out flax, Shenitlu Shinav, that some of the teeth are missing. So this is the din. If v'neshtayru b'shtayim, if two teeth together are still there, one tooth adjacent to the other, then temeyos, then this utensil is still considered a utensil, and therefore it's susceptible to becoming tamei. But va'achas, if there's only one tooth left, and therefore it's no longer functional, you can't comb flax out with it, then tohira, then it's no longer susceptible to becoming tamei. V'chulam shenitlu achas bifnei atzmam. However, when you take every tooth in itself, the tooth that's now broken off the comb, so the Mishnah says a chiddush, and we'll see that this is really one side of an argument, that every tooth independently is tamei. To make 2 points. Point number one is when a tooth was broken off a comb, it, according to everyone, needs to be designated for a certain function. A tooth of a comb could be used to clean out a candle. It could be used to peg or as a hook. However, it for sure needs a verbal designation. That's the minimum. And according to Rabbi Shimon, the verbal designation is enough to make it tamei. However, according to the Chachamim, and as we'll see later, and that is the halacha, that a verbal designation is not enough. You also have to do something physically to it. For example, you would have to add a handle to the tooth, or make some type of other physical mark in this tooth that will be called a tikkun. You're being misaken it. So not only do you have a verbal designation, but you have a physical act, and only then will it be susceptible to becoming impure, because it was now designated for a new purposeful designation. So this Mishnah seemingly is only quoting the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that a verbal designation is enough to make each tooth tamei. And shel tzemed, if the comb was originally made to come out wool, and over there the din is a little bit different. That shenitlu shinav achas mibentayim, if every second tooth was taken out, so then it's tahor. Then it's no longer susceptible to becoming impure. However, on the other hand, if nishtayru by gimel b'makim echad, if 3 teeth were left together, one adjacent the other, then it's tamei. And as we'll see right away in the Gemara, that this is an apparent contradiction. The Mishnah beginning writing in the end, in the comb of wool, that if every second tooth is missing, then it's tahor, implying that if there are 2 teeth together, then it's tamei. Here the Braisa says that if 3 teeth together, only then is it still functional as a comb, and therefore it's susceptible to becoming tamei. And another detail to the 3, that hoisa hachitzoina achas mehem, that if from these 3, one of them is the outermost tooth, then since the outermost tooth was probably thicker than the other teeth, and it was not used for the combing process, so therefore it's still tahor. It's not considered 3 teeth. We don't count the outermost tooth. Very much like our combs, it's very common that in our combs, the outermost tooth is very thick, doesn't match the size, the edges, correct. Now the Braisa there continues that im nitlu beis, if 2 teeth were taken off, and va'ason lemelakate or lemalkate, and it was made into a tweezers, so then temeyos, then it's tamei. Or if only 1 tooth of this comb that was made to comb out the wool was taken off, vihiskina, and it was fixed by putting a handle onto it in order to make it into a utensil to clean out a nair, to clean out a candle. Or if it was fixed to a handle, there was a tikkun. In order to make this 1 tooth, limituach, to use it to stretch out garments. So you wanted to stretch out a garment, you needed to peg it one side into a board and then peg the other side into the board, then to meyom. In other words, here in the Seifa, actually, the Braisa is implying that just a verbal designation is not enough. Another contradiction almost in the Braisa. This is the opinion of the Chachamim. You have to affix a handle to it. You have to make a tikkun. The kasha of the Gemara, the kasha of Rav Nachum is from the Reisha of this Braisa. That when he spoke about the Pishtan comb, the flax comb, he said that a verbal designation is enough. Really, this is an argument, as we mentioned before in the Braisa. This Mishnah, this Tam Mishnah, quoted the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and V'kaimelan, and we all know the Ein Halacha Ka'is a Mishnah. The halacha is not like this Tam Mishnah. So here you see that when you have a machlokes and a braisa, even though in the Mishnah it's a stam Mishnah, you Rabbi Bo said halachic is stam. In this case, it's not true. This is the only case that he found. So to which Rabbi Bo answered him, Amar Lei, so Rabbi Bo tells Rab Nachum, Bar Mina Dahahi. We had this expression many times. Take this Mishnah, the way you said it, out of your memory of Mishnayos, because it's not correct what you said. The Rabbi Yechanan v'Reish Lakish, the Amrit Harvayu Zu Eina Mishnah. The way you said it is not the way Rabbi wrote it. We'll see at the end of this Gemara that what was missing was just the words, these are the words of Rab Shimon. It's not a Stam Mishnah. Rebbe actually wrote who says this, which takes it away from the Stam Mishnah, anonymous Mishnah category. Initially, the Gemara understands that Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish held that the whole Mishnah is wrong. And the Gemara wants to understand why is the Mishnah not a correct Mishnah. And my Tama. So Amar Afuna Bar Manoyech in the name of Ravidi Bereid Rav Ika, Mishum, the Kasher Reisha L'Seifa, because there is an inherent contradiction between the Reisha of the Mishnah and the Seifa. The Tani, it says, Shalt Semer, and right, we're speaking about the Reisha and the Seifa of the Seifa, of the case of the wool comb. It says that if you had a comb of wool, Shenitnu Shinav Achas Miben time, that if every second tooth was taken out, then the comb is no longer functional at all, and it's tahar, it's not susceptible to becoming tummy. If every second tooth is missing, which implies if two teeth are together, then it still remains susceptible to becoming tummy. And v'hadir, and right afterwards the Mishnah writes v'hadir tani nishtayda by gimel tummy, that only if three teeth together, only then is the comb still susceptible, it's still a keli. In other words, gimel in shtayim loy. So this is an apparent contradiction, and perhaps that's why Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish said that this Mishnah is not correct. To which the Gemara says, no, that was not the problem that they had, because of my kusha, this is not a question. Dilma, perhaps, ha begava yasa, ha bebora yasa. That here we're speaking about the inner one, there we're speaking about the outer one. There are different ways of understanding it. Let's explain it one of the ways that Rashi explains it. That we're speaking about a comb that has two rows, an inner and an outer row. Just to know that the inner row means the row that's closer to the handle, and the outer row is the row that's farther away from the handle. It means at the end of the keli. The ones that were in the outer row were actually, the teeth were made to comb the wool itself. The teeth that are in the inner row, they weren't made primarily to comb out the wool, they were made to chap, to grab on to the whole garment, to hold on to the woolen garment. So the one in the inner row only needs to have two for it still to be functional. Since its purpose is not to actually comb, only to hold on to the garment, if there's two, it's going to hold on to it. But the teeth in the outer row that were made originally to actually comb, by the combing part you have to have at least three teeth by the woolen comb, and if you don't have three adjacent teeth, not counting the exterior ones, then it's no longer functional. So that can be a resolution. So that was not the reason why Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish said, Zu Eina Mishnah. So the Gemara proposes, I'll tell you why the Mishnah is not a Mishnah. Because it says, V'kulam shenitlu achas achas bifnei atzman temeis. In the Reisha, which is actually the whole question that Rav Nochum had against Rabbi Bohu, when we're speaking about a broken utensil, that we're making that broken piece into a new designation, into a new keli, in which he said that all you need is a verbal designation to use it to a candle cleaner, but you don't have to change it, you don't have to physically be misakin it. But it says in the Seifa, by the woolen comb, that achas, that if you have one tooth, if you affix the handle to it, in order to use it as a candle cleaner or to use it as a garment stretcher, only then it's tamei, which is actually the opinion of the Chachamim, which is the halacha, hiskina in, implying that you have to make a tikkun to it. You have to fix something in it physically. Lo yiskina loy. So to this, Amar Abaye says this is also not a contradiction. Umay kushya, perhaps, ha bikatayu. When the Braisa and the Reisha says that if one tooth broke off the linen comb, if you designated it to liner, it's tamei, it's a keli, that's perhaps when the tooth already broke off with the handle. No, it's not only did the tooth break off, but a part of the comb itself broke off with it, so you already have a handle. So it doesn't need a tikkun of a handle. And and in the Sefer we're speaking about the tooth itself broke off. It's bechlal not functional as is. You have to add a handle. So there, if you don't add the handle, it's going to stay tahar. Amaraf Papa, another suggested answer. Umay kusha dilma hapakati nasa haba alimasa. That when do you have to affix a handle to it? When it's a cotton, when it's very narrow, when it's hard to grab. It means the tooth itself is ungrabbable. Or if you grab it, you can't grab it properly. So you have to add a handle. In the safe, that's in the safe of the Mishnah. That's why the Sefer says you have to add a handle. In the Reisha, where the Reisha says just a verbal designation is enough, is speaking about a ali masa, a wide tooth. The wide tooth in itself is already graspable. So there's no contradiction here. Now, the challenge is back up now. Being that there's no contradiction, this Braisa is actually saying that if it's functional, then a verbal designation is enough, which that is the opinion only of Rab Shimon, and this is a Stam Mishnah, and if Rebbe, when he writes a Mishnah anonymously, means to tell you this is the halacha, then this should have been the halacha, but this is not the halacha. So the Gemara says, you know what Rabbi Bo knew? Why he told Rav Nachum it's not a Mishnah, Mishum de Mesaimi bo dafkanei. I think this is the first time he had this expression together here. Dafkanei means dafkanikis. Dafkanei means people who learn the Mishnahs by heart, mamish meduyik. Particular. So they call them dafkanim. So the dafkanik is when they learn this Mishnah, they learn the Mishnah verbatim, because there is no inherent contradiction. But the Mishnah ends with the words, Zoi divrei Rab Shimon, and which changes everything. That Rebbe himself did not quote this opinion anonymously. Rebbe quoted the author. Once Rebbe quotes the author, there's no longer this rule that Rebbe quotes it anonymously to tell you that this is the halacha. Rebbe Dafka did not quote us anonymously, because this is not the halacha. And that's the end of the sugya. Yeah, amazing. What's the opinion of scaling on? You see here the power of speech. You know, if Akimas Fosav have a Maisa, which would be the opinion of Rab Shimon. Stam Rab Shimon is Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. Rab Shimon Bar Yochai is the father of Kabbalah. On Pi Kabbalah, Dibur is Mamish Maisa. It's more ruchnistic.
There's a third possibility.
What would be the third possibility?
Use it, not designate it, and not fix it, but you actually use this as a utensil, a ma'asav mochichim.
I think, I'm not sure, but I think what Rabban is saying here, I think that using it is a tikkun. I think we had this together in Hilchos Shabbos, another dinner.
You don't need to attach something.
Correct,
something,
but tikkun means you have to, it's a physical act.
That
Correct, almost sure.
Yeah.
I'm almost sure. Yeah, when it comes to muksa, when you want to make something, a non-keli into a keli, did you need to use it, or do you have to actually do something to it?
Right?
Well, the difference would be that fixing a handle is you're changing it,
yeah,
and here you are mentally, verbally changing it. Using it doesn't mean changing it. Anyways, I don't know. Let's go weiter. Shalach Rab Chia.
That's why I'm asking. I'm saying it as a third option.
Okay, could be. I don't know. Now we're going to go back to the sugya that we're learning of Havchana. So what we learned yesterday was that we quoted Rabbi Yechanan, who paskined like our Mishnah, because originally Rabbi Yechanan understood that the Tanakama is not a Das Rabim, and he paskined like Rabbi Yossi, and like Rabbi Yehuda, which said that from engagement to a marriage, or from a marriage to only an engagement, you don't need to have 3 months. Then at the end, Rabbi Yechanan found that in Kerem B'Yavna they learned the Tanakama as Das Rabim, that you always loy plug, you have to wait 90 days, even from an engagement, right, to a marriage, or from a marriage to an engagement, or from an engagement to an engagement. So now we're going to have other opinions regarding what the halach is. Shalach Rab Chia bar Avin, Rab Chia bar Avin sent to teach that Ma'arsin Toich Gimel. Again, he paskin the lenient opinion, like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rabbi Yossi, that when it comes to getting engaged, when a woman goes out of one marriage, she left the marriage either because she got a get or because her husband died, and she's entering into a halachic engagement, only kiddushin, only erusin, then for that you don't have to wait 90 days, you can get engaged within the 90 days. And then the Gemara says, V'chein oisem masa, and we see that people actually behave that way. This is like the best proof. In the name of Rab Chanina HaGadol. And now we're quoting the opinion of Rab Chanina, and there's a machlekes rishonim how to learn it. We'll learn it one way, that Rubai Shal Rishon, that even when it comes to marriage, according to Rab Chanina HaGadol, you don't always have to have 90 days. you have to have a halachic 90 days. What's pshat a halachic 90 days? There are certain times in halacha that the majority of a certain period of time is considered as if the whole time passed. There's a concept called ruba hayom kekuloi. Actually, you have sometimes even mixas hayom kekuloi. Here you have to have roiv. So if you have roiv of the first month, and roiv of the third month, and ve'emtzoi shalom, and the middle month is complete, then according to Rab Chanina Hagadol, according to certain Rishonim, you can even get married, from marriage to marriage. And even in that, there are so many different opinions. Many people say that he doesn't mean just the majority. See, the majority of the month would be 16 days, which would mean 62 days. 30 days plus 16 is 62. People say even at 61 and a bit. Other Rishonim teach over here that even if you meant Nesuyin, no, we don't do that. No, they speak about this. Then many people say that you have to have the majority of a month. So it doesn't go by days, but it goes dafka by Jewish months. For example, if the woman became a widow and her husband passed away on Yud Dalid, let's say Mar Cheshvan, on the 14th of Mar Cheshvan, that means that from the month of Mar Cheshvan, she still has 16 days. So then when you have 16 days of the first month and the whole middle month and another 16 days of the third month, that's when you say Roiv HaChodesh KaChodesh. Yeah, well, whatever the case is, that Rab Chanina was even more lenient. And now we're having a third opinion. This opinion is actually the most chamor of all the opinions we learned until now. This opinion of Ameimer is based on the premise that the halacha is really like the Chachamim, like the Tanakama. And as Rabbi Yochanan found out, which is Das Rabbim, that really even from a marriage to an engagement, you have to wait 90 days. The only thing he was lenient in is that you don't have to wait for 90 days to pass, that you can get engaged on the 90th day. And now the Gemara right away says, one second. Once you say that for this scenario you need to have the din of 90 days, 90 days until now should mean that 90 full days, which does not include the day of the get or the day of the passing, and that does not include the day of the marriage or the day of the engagement. That Rav and Shmuel Damar Tarvayu tzrich lahamtem gimel chadoshim chutz miyem shemezboi, excluding the day of death or get. V'chutz miyem shenes arsaboi. And Ameimer is saying that you could get engaged on the 90th day. So the Gemara says that Ameimer is not necessarily arguing with Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel's din was not said for the havchana that's needed between marriage and marriage, but it was said from the other din that we learned together, the takanas chachamim, that a man is not allowed to marry me'uberes chaveroi and meinekes chaveroi, that a man is not allowed to marry a woman if she's carrying someone else's child, and if she's nursing someone else's child. There, by nursing, we said you have to wait chav dalet chodesh. So it was there that Rav and Shmuel says that on the final day of the chav dalet chodesh, on that day she can already get engaged. That Rav Shmuel Damri Tarvayu tzricha lahamten chav dalet chodesh chutz miyem shenelad b'im v'chutz miyem shenes arsa b'im. So you have to have 24 months aside of the day.
Aside of both days. Both bookends are on.
Correct. You have to have a full 24 months. Now, I heard of Psagud, the Meiri says like this. It says, so, bishul is one of the words that could be used for marriage. So he says like this. He says that sevashel is bigematria 732. When you speak about the din of waiting 2 years, the Meiri says it's 2 solar years. A solar year is 365 days. 365 days times 2 is 730. Leisavashel is gematria 732. 730 day means chutz miyayim v'chutz miyayim. So over there, you have to wait chutz miyayim. But when it comes to the 90 days, you can get engaged on the 90th day. Okay. And you can be more lenient. Because you have the havchana, because many Tanoim hold, you can get engaged within the 90 days. So that was, so to say, the compromise that Ameimer made. The Gemara says, that there was a person that got engaged, and he made a party, he made a suda, and he made it on the 90th day. And and Rava made him throw out his su'uda. And if we are saying that Amemer, and l'chayda we should paskin like Amemer, said that you're right, the halacha is not as lenient as Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda. Even for Erusin, you have to wait 90 days. But you can get engaged on the 90th day. You don't have to exclude the 90th day. Why did Rava make him ruin a Su'udah? So the Gemara says, that story wasn't that he made a Su'udas Erusin. That was a Su'udas Nesuyin Havoi. And married, that's where you need to have the Havchana, to know who the father is. And the Gemara concludes the sugya v'hilchasa tzarich lahamtin chav dalad chaydish, that we paskin like Rav and Shmuel, that when it comes to the din that you cannot marry meinekas chaveiroi, you have to wait for the 24 months to pass. That's chutz miyem shenelad boy. That's chutz miyem shenesarsa boy. You know, like we said, it's 732 days. It's 24 months plus the first day plus the last day. And v'tzarich lahamtin gimel chadoshim.
Right to say 2 solar years.
Correct.
24 months.
Well, that's the way they said it. And when they paskin that you have to wait 3 months, not like Ameimar. So if you're going to say we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Yossi, that you don't need 90 days for engagement, that's a whole different thing. Then you don't have to do it on the 90th day. You can do it whenever you want. But the moment you apply the din of waiting hafchana 3 months, you have to wait 3 months, then 3 months means really 92 days. Now,
no, the solar year is the Meir.
Correct. It's okay. Now we have the din of Rabbi Yossi. When we learned the Mishnah yesterday, the Mishnah on Da'af, Mem, Aleph, Amad Aleph, and Amad Beis, we learned it the way the Gemara is going to learn it in the beginning and at the end. The initial understanding and the final understanding will be that Rabbi Yossi agrees with Rabbi Yehuda, that when it comes to the din of separating 90 days, separating 90 days is only between marriage and marriage. Only between the times that a woman can actually get pregnant because she can be with her husband. But between an engagement and a marriage, or between a marriage and a new engagement, there we don't need to have 90 days. The only thing that Rabbi Yossi changed from Rabbi Yehuda was that if a woman is leaving a marriage because her husband died, which means she is mourning, that from over there, even though normally from a marriage to an engagement, you don't need to wait, because engagement is not going to allow the husband to be with the wife. Nevertheless, since she is in mourning, she can't get an erusin because it goes against the laws of mourning. That's the initial understanding, and again, that's going to be the maskana, but the Gemara is going to ask on it. You know, the whole din of Rabbi Yossi is based on the premise that if a woman is an almana, means if she lost her husband, and therefore for 30 days there's dinei avelus, one of the applications of avelus, of the shloishim, would be that she cannot get engaged. This will be challenged. It's going to be upheld at the end, but the Gemara initially is going to ask that l'chayda, during the shloishim, a woman should be allowed to get engaged, not during the shiva, perhaps not to make a su'udas erusin, not to make a festivity, a party, but the engagement itself, l'chayda, should be permissible in the shloishim. That's going to be the question against Rabbi Yossi, and the Gemara in the beginning is going to struggle by trying to say that Rabbi Yossi holds something very different from the way we learned it. Let's read it inside. Amar Rab Chizda asked, how can you, Rabbi Yossi, say that a almana from marriage has to wait 30 days to get engaged, not because of Havchana, because of the din of Avelos, she's mourning, and you can't add joy by getting engaged. I have a Kal V'Chaimer that should teach you that a Shloishim Avelos should not contradict, should not prohibit an engagement. Where does he take it from? He takes it from the mourning that we, the Jewish people, have during the 3 weeks, during the 9 days, during the week of Tisha B'Av, during the time that was designated to mourn the Churban of both Batei Mikdashim. That during the time that we, the Jewish people, are not allowed to laundry, clean our clothing. We're going to see soon the dinim that we learned in Masechtas Moed Katan, quoted Bekitzur here, that there is the 3 weeks, there is for us Ashkenazim the 9 days, but according to the Machaber, and this is all coming back from the Gemara, from the Mishnayos, that there is another din of Avelus that differentiates between the 9 days and the week in which Tisha B'Av falls. It's called Shavua Shechal by Tisha B'Av. Even according to us Ashkenazim today, that normally all of the laws of Shavua we apply also to the 9 days. That's how the Ramah paskins. Even for us, there are still certain differences, but let's learn over here. The Mishnah there says that the Shavua Shechal by Tisha B'Av, Asur L'Chabes. You're not allowed to clean clothing. We don't do it for the whole 9 days. But this din is the din of, this is only for the week. But in the week, Shechal by Tisha B'Av Mutar L'Yaris. You're allowed to make an engagement, not a party, but you can get engaged, as we'll prove from the Mishnah is. So therefore, Rab Chizda says that if during the time that you can't even clean your garments, you're allowed to get engaged, the shloshim period of mourning, as we know, we learned this in Moed Katan, is a period in which you can't take a haircut, asur l'sapid, but muter l'chabes, the isur to clean clothing is only in the Shiva. So during the shloshim that you are allowed to clean clothing, you should for sure be allowed to get engaged. Makim shemuter l'chabes is ein adin shemuter l'yaris. So it's a question against Rabbi Yossi. Why are you implying that because of mourning she can't get engaged? And from where do I see that Shavua Shechal by Tisha B'Av, it's Asur L'Chabes, but Muter L'Yaris? It says in the Mishnah, Shabbos Shechal Tisha B'Av B'Teicha, that the week in which Tisha B'Av falls in, Asur L'Sapir, you can't take a haircut, and there's an Isur L'Chabes, you cannot clean your clothing. However, there's one exception, that if Tisha B'Av falls on Friday is that of Shabbos, on Tisha B'Av, for sure you can't clean your clothing. But which would mean that when Shabbos comes in, you might not have clean clothing. So what would be the option? To clean your clothing Erev Tisha B'Av. Then you're allowed to do it, ironically. No, it's Wednesday you can't clean your clothing. You're in the week of Tisha B'Av. But on Thursday, which is the last option before Shabbos to clean your clothing, but Chamishi, Mutter, why? You're not dishonoring the mourning period, but you are honoring the Shabbos. The Pnei Kovay Shabbos. So first of all, here we see the din that the Shavua Shechal by Tisha B'Av Asur L'Sapir, Asur L'Chabes. You can't wash your clothing. And the Tanya we learned in a Braisa regarding engagement that Koydem Zman Hazeh. The initial understanding of the Gemara is Zman Hazeh goes on Tisha B'Av. Koydem Zman Hazeh means the time before Tisha B'Av. What's the time period before Tisha B'Av that has its own name of a time period? The week of Tisha B'Av. That the week of Tisha B'Av, Shvosh Chal by Tisha B'Av, Ha'om Mematim B'Iskeim, people should restrict their activities. Without getting into details, we'll read Tosfos just in a moment. What activities? Melissa Umelitain, they should restrict their commerce, their business activities. Milivnois Vilinatoya, their building and planting activities. Tosfos is debating whether these restrictions are only commerce and building of Simcha, which is the first opinion of Tosfos. And then, Lav Dafka. So Tosfos gives us a vague statement at the end. Elo, look at the second to last line, that Venida, the Ribri Maso Matan Ka'asar, Shemi'atu Yosimi B'Sha'ar Yomim, that the prohibition or the need of minimizing commerce is even non-joyful commerce, but working less, just to point out that we are in the mourning period. Uma Arsen, but you could get engaged. Avoloi kainsin, but you can't get married. And even when you can get engaged, you can't make a Su'uda Seirusin. That's the end of the Braisa. Here you see clearly, Shvosh Chal by Tisha B'Av, that Kibbutz is Asr, Li'ares is Mutter. So l'chayda during the Shloshim, that we all know that Kibbutz is Mutter, so Eresin for sure be Mutter. Kashem. So first of all, the Gemara tries to answer it. No. Kitanya hihi, when the Braisa says Koydem Zman Hazeh, the Koydem Zman Hazeh does not refer to the week before Shavua Shechal by Tisha B'Av. There, Erusin is Asur. Koydem Tanya. The din of the Braisa is the time before the week before Tisha B'Av. We would call that the 9 days. That in the 9 days you can get engaged, but not Shavua Shechal by Tisha B'Av. And in the 9 days you are allowed to laundry clothing, so you don't have from this a Kal V'Chomer. But the problem is still here. So Amar Rava says, Rava, even v'koidim nami, even if you're going to say that's what the meaning of the Braisa is speaking about, and you are allowed to get engaged during the 9 days, I still have a question because there's still a Kal V'Chomer. And what is that? Uma b'mokim she'asur lisa v'litain. That during the 9 days, koidim, from this Braisa, when the people have to minimize, they have to restrict commerce, they have to restrict business. Still, mutar l'yareis, that's the meaning of the Braisa. Koidim, you can get engaged. Makim shemutar lisa v'litain, during the Shloshim period, people know these dinim, unfortunately, because it happens. People pass away. During the Shiva, people are not allowed to do business. And right after Shiva, people go back to work. There's no din of restricting commerce during the Shleishim. That people could work normally during the Shleishim period, then for sure they should end it in, they should be allowed to get engaged. So no, so even if the Kal V'chomer is not from Shavua Shechalboi, the Kasha is from the Tisha B'Av. And if it's not from laundering clothing, it's from business. But you have a Kal V'chomer which l'chayda should imply that it should be mutter to get engaged. The Gemara at the end of the sugya is going to respond that that's not a Kal V'chomer, but we'll get to that later. So now, before we get to that, the Gemara is going to give two other ways of learning Rabbi Yossi. So Gemara says, Loi tema de Rabbi Yossi, oimer kol anorshim yisarsu. Don't say that Rabbi Yossi is agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda, and he's saying that after a Nesuyin, you don't need to wait 90 days to get engaged. He's not saying that. He's saying something even more. That Rabbi Yossi is arguing with the whole din of Havchana. We were learning that you have to wait 90 days to know who the father is. As we learn different opinions in the Gemara, different reasons for that. To be mafchin bein zera lezera. Rabbi Yossi is saying that from a marriage to another marriage, you don't need to wait 90 days. However, there's one exception, that before you get married, you can't get married during Shloshim. Only restriction because of mourning, and everyone knows that you can't get married during Shloshim. Are you telling me that there's such an opinion? So the Gemara says, yes, leislei, there is such an opinion. Now, the Gemara is going to refute it later. So that's one approach of understanding Rabbi Yossi. And the Iba Yisema, which is the Gemara gives another answer because it made sense that you should be mavchin. How would you know who the father is? It's important to know who the father is. For many dinim, even for dinim that was not mentioned. There's a mitzvah of kibbud avayim. There's dinim avelus. You need to know who your father is. Dinim Yerusha. Oh, so the Iba Yisema, or I'll tell you the following. Lo'olam islay. Rabbi Yossi holds of the din of avchana. The Ema now may be learned that Rabbi Yossi says the following. Kol arusais, gerushais. If a woman terminated her engagement, and this is important, not through her husband's passing. If her husband passes, she's mourning. And we'll get to that moment. And there are certain dini avela consequences. But if it was terminated because there was a get, so she's going from engagement from the previous marriage, then she could get married without waiting 90 days. And marriage is something that everyone knows you cannot do in the shloshim, which is why it has to be arusais, gerushais, not an almana. No, it's from a previous engagement. She can go into a new marriage. Here, Rabbi Yossi holds like Rabbi Yehuda. You don't need 90 days because she was never with her first husband. Is it just like Rabbi Yehuda? We want to have Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi have to argue with something, and the Gemara is taking it for granted, and it's correct that Rabbi Yehuda will be maida that you cannot get married within the shleishim. It means even though Rabbi Yehuda says that you don't need havchana between engagement and marriage, or between marriage and engagement, Rabbi Yehuda also has to be maida that if a woman is in mourning, she can't get married. So where will Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda disagree? A woman who is leaving a previous marriage that was a full-fledged marriage. Rabbi Yehuda says if she wants to get engaged to her new husband, since engagement does not allow the couple to be together yet, you only have to wait 90 days to get married, but for an engagement you don't need havchana. Here Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Here Rabbi Yossi is more machmer than Rabbi Yehuda. He holds that since engagement is done for the purpose of marriage, engagement is the first step of marriage, so you can't get engaged if you left the previous marriage. If you left the previous engagement, you can even get married within the 90 days. But if you were married, even though theoretically engagement should be permissible, but here Rabbi Yossi holds like the Tanakama, you got to be machmer because engagement might lead to marriage and you might get married within the 90 days. Rabbi Yehuda savar nusuya muteres liyaris.
That explains why the Yehuda is machmer.
Correct.
Exactly for the same reason.
Rabbi Yehuda savar nusuya muteres liyaris. Rabbi Yehuda holds that even from nusuyin you can go into erusin, and Rabbi Yossi holds that nusuya asura liyaris. Period. Frekti gemara v'savar Rabbi Yossi nusuya asura liyaris. Can you tell me this is the taich of Rabbi Yossi? That Rabbi Yossi will be machmer and he'll hold that from a marriage to an engagement you also need 90 days, it can be. Because Vatayim, we learned in the Braisa is always more elaborate than the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi Omer, look at the words. Kol hanoshim yisarsu, all women l'chayda should mean, even if they were married before, and that marriage ended through a get, they can now get engaged right away. Chutz minhu almana, but if the marriage ended because the husband died, so this woman cannot get engaged l'chayda, speak about engagement, if she's a widow mepnei ha'ibul. And how much is the laws of mourning? 30 days. And v'kulan, and all women should not get married until they have 3 months. So l'chayda, this contradicts the din. How does it contradict the din? Hai mai kushya. The Gemara is going to show you how this brisa is seemingly saying that Rabbi Yossi holds that you are allowed to get married if you came from an engagement. So the Gemara says, where do you see it? Ilema, if you see it, because it says, Rabbi Yossi says, Kol hanoshim yisarsu, that all women can get engaged, all women, l'chayda, meaning no matter if they're coming from just an engagement, or even if they're coming from a marriage, if that's the kasha, which is quite clear. So the Gemara says, 1 second. When we read the words of our Mishnah, the Mishnah also implied it. Elama, this V'i Ba'isema was medachik, said that the Mishnah really only means that you were divorced from an engagement. So if you had the right to add that heichatimsa into the Mishnah, you can add it in the Braisa. Mi alima mi masnisim. What is the Braisa is holier than the Mishnah? The Mishnah also said those words. And in our Mishnah de Oikimna, this whole second answer is implying that where did Rabbi Yossi say a woman can get married right away? Only if she came from an engagement. And more than that, only if the engagement terminated by a get, not by death. Hachinami, here also, read into the Braisa, that in the ratio of this Braisa, when it says that all women can get married right away, that's only if she came from an engagement, not from a marriage, and the engagement broke off because of a get. So the Gemara says, no, the kasha was from the Seifa. Because you have to make the Braisa symmetrical. If the Braisa and the ratio was speaking about coming from an engagement, right? So when it says in the Braisa, v'kulan lo yinasu at she'yiyu lahem gimel chadashim, it means you're coming from a marriage to marriage. Because the Reish is speaking about engagement. So the contrast of the Sefer must be coming from a marriage. And here we're saying that in Suvehu Deloy, the Braisa is saying that from marriage to marriage, you have to wait 3 months. Everyone holds to that. But if Rabbi Yossi is saying that from marriage to marriage, you have to wait 3 months, what does that imply? That from marriage to engagement, you don't have to wait 3 months. Ha is rusei, but from marriage to just an engagement, shaper dami. In other words, the Reisha is allowing you from Erusin to Nesuyin. The Seifa is not allowing Nesuyin to Nesuyin. But if the Seifa is not allowing Nesuyin to Nesuyin, it is allowing Nesuyin to Erusin. Amar Rava says, Rava, Taritz Emahachi. So say, Taich the Braisa the following. That Rabbi Yossi says, Kol Arusais Gerushais Yinasu. Women leaving an engagement, not because they are mourning, because they got divorced, they can get married. So far, so good. Chutz minu almana, aside of a widow, mipnei ha'ibel, because she has to mourn, v'kabe imel shelo shleishim yoyim. In other words, if a woman is if she's in mourning, she has to wait 30 days to get married. V'nesuais lo yisarsu, we're still trying to be mendachik, that Rabbi Yossi is machmer, that if she's leaving a marriage, even though she's only getting engaged, but Rabbi Yossi was machmer. If she'll get engaged, she might get married. Lo yisarsu at sheyilem shleisha chadashim. But the kasha will be if we're speaking about going from a marriage to an engagement. If we're speaking of almana min ho'erusin mi'isle ibol, if the almana is referring to she's going from an engagement to a marriage, that Rabbi Yossi says on that it's only an engagement that terminated with a get. But if the engagement terminated with a marriage, with a death, if she's a mourner, if she's an almana, she has to wait 30 days to get married, that itself doesn't make sense. Because l'chayra, a woman only has to mourn for her husband if she was married to her husband. So this kasha goes on the Braisa and goes on the Mishnah, that if you're only learning Rabbi Yossi, if Rabbi Yossi is machmer, the only time he's lenient is only from an engagement to a marriage. From an engagement, there should bechlal not be a din of an almana. And where do we see that? Because Vatani Rabbi Chia Barami says the following. Again, these dinim are not so practical today because we make the engagement together under the chuppah. But in those days, when they made the engagement, they gave the ring, and then they normally waited 12 months. So there is a connection between the husband and wife. If he wants to separate, he has to give her a get. But look what that engagement does not do. That ishtay arusa, that if there are a couple that only got the halachic engagement, and she dies, loy oinen, he does not have to mourn for her. Now, aninus is the first step in mourning, and what's going to be taken for granted, and it will not be challenged, that if there's no dinei aninus, if the husband to the wife, or we'll see soon, or the wife towards the husband, doesn't have to keep the laws of aninus, which is the highest level of mourning, then they for sure don't have to keep the shiva, and they for sure don't have to keep the shloishim. There's no dinei avelus, even though the Braisa only used the words aninus, but it goes to all of the laws of mourning. And also, if the kohen if the husband was a kohen, and the engaged wife died, so normally a kohen cannot become tamei. But there is an exception that when it comes to burying his closest 7 relatives, one of them is she'eroi, the wife, then he could be metama, but he cannot be metama if the wife was only an halachically engaged wife. V'loi metama lo. V'chein vice versa, if there was only erusin and he dies, he loy oinenes. She does not keep the closest mourning, the highest mourning called aninus, for sure not the shloishim. V'loi metamaloi. Here the Rishonim point out, v'loi metamaloi cannot mean what it meant in the Reisha. You see, a kohen is obligated, has the responsibility of not becoming tamei. A male kohen, a kohenes could become tamei. So when it says v'loi metamaloi, it must mean something. A bas kohen, a woman. So even if she's a bas kohen, that she cannot become tamei. Why not? She can become tamei to anyone. It means that she's not obligated to occupy herself in his burial, because they were not fully married yet.
Did she get married to the Kohen?
Yeah, because she's a widow. Even if she was married and the husband dies, she can marry another Kohen. Here she was only engaged. Correct. Mesa, if she dies, again, there was only an engagement, he does not inherit her. Because a husband inherits his married wife midoiraisa, but engagement not. The opposite, mesu, if he died. So here, there's an exception that goyve ksuvasa. We spoke about this one time, bekitzer, that a ksuba only has to be written for a marriage. If the couple chose to write a ksuba even while they're engaged, it's a monetary obligation. So then any monetary obligation is a valid obligation. So if there was a ksuba for the engagement, and in the ksuba it says that if he will die, she will get her ksuba, she'll get it because that's what they agree to. So that will be an exception. Bottom line is, it says loy oinenes. So if Rabbi Yossi, who's speaking about the waiting for marriage, is speaking about from an engagement to a marriage, dear Rabbi Yossi is meiko, and on this he says chutz min almana, that b'chal doesn't make sense. Ela the Gemara says tanoi, that you made a kal v'chomer, and I'm going to refute your whole kal v'chomer. The kal v'chomer is not a kal v'chomer. You were asking that if a woman was married, there she has to mourn, but she cannot get engaged. So and you asked, why can she not get engaged? You have a kal v'chomer. I'll show you that there are other tanoim from where you won't have the kal v'chomer, and shitaka cannot get engaged. The Tanya says, mirosh chodesh, from the 9 days until the fast, people have to minimize, they have to restrict, like we learned before, their business dealings. Then it says, umili ares, that they're not allowed to get engaged. What was the whole kal v'chomer? That during the 9 days that a person is not allowed to do business, but they could get engaged. So for sure, during the shloishim, you could get engaged. There's no kal v'chomer anymore. Because according to this Tana, during the time that you can't do business, you cannot get engaged. You can't get engaged in the 9 days. You can't get married in the 9 days. And then when you go further, when you go into the week of Tisha B'Av, then you have to add asur l'saper. There you cannot even take a haircut. There you're not allowed to even laundry your clothing. these words in parentheses, we'll leave in parentheses because that goes against everything we just learned. And the Yesh Oimrim, and other people hold, which is the way we end up paskening the Ramah, we Ashkenazim, that during the whole 9 days, you're not allowed to take a haircut and you're not allowed to clean your clothing. So now the Kal V'chomer is off. So now we're back to learning that Rabbi Yossi is holding like Rabbi Yehuda, lenient on both ends. That from marriage to engagement, or from engagement to marriage, you don't need to have havchana, because you're not getting married. The only exception Rabbi Yossi made is that if a woman is leaving marriage, and therefore she's a widow, who has to have din of aninos and of shiva of shloshim for her husband, and now she wants to get engaged, she can't get engaged within 30 days, because of the dini avelus. Maskav Rav Ashi, how do you see from over here, from the Braisa, from which you explained that there's no more Kal V'chomer, that the Braisa says that a woman cannot get engaged during the whole 9 days, because it says you can't get engaged. Maybe when the Braisa says Mimai de la'aris li'aris mamish, maybe the Braisa doesn't mean you cannot get engaged. All the Braisa means is Dilma le'me'emat su'uda seidasin huda asr. Maybe you can't make the party of engagement, but maybe la'aris engagement itself should be permissible. So the Gemara tells
the business, but the simcha.
Correct. And therefore the Kal V'chomer is back up, the Kasha is back up. So the Gemara says 1 second. You have to be symmetrical in your interpretation of the Braisa. That means if when the Braisa says that you can't get engaged during the 9 days, if it only means you can't make the engagement party, then when the Braisa says you can't get married, it should also mean that you can't do the party of the marriage, but marriage itself will be permissible. That can't be. Iyachim Elisa only means linase name is leme'evat su'udas nisuin aser. But are you going to tell me, Rav Ashi, that marriage itself is permissible, and that can't be for sure? You can't get married during the 9 days. To which Rav Ashi responds, no. Hachi hashta bishleim nisuin. The reason why marriage without a party is for sure prohibited, because marriage in itself brings joy. But engagement without a su'udah is not so joyful. So maybe the Braisa who says that you can't doesn't mean you can't get engaged. Maybe it only means you can't make the su'udas engagement. But maybe engagement you could have. So we're back with the Kal V'chomer question against Rabbi Yossi. Elam Rav Ashi will say that even if engagement is permissible during the 9 days, I can still argue that during the shloshim, when a woman becomes a widow from marriage, where there are dinim of aninus and shiva and shloshim, there the mourning is more serious than the mourning of Tisha B'Av, and it does make sense to say that during the 9 days you can get engaged. During the shloshim you cannot get engaged. We find that there you could do business, and here you have to diminish business. So Rav Ashi says, Shani avelus chadashim avelus yeshena. There's a big difference between a mourning that is for something new meaning that her husband passed away, versus a mourning that we're mourning from since the times of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. That's one difference. This is not enough, because we were educated that we have to feel as if the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed every day. And the Gemara, the Chazal said that any generation, if the Beis HaMikdash was not built in that generation, it's considered as if it was destroyed in that generation. So therefore Rav Ashi gives another explanation. V'shani avelus de rabim ma'avelus de yachid. That whenever the community is mourning, there's a statement that we have, it's called tzaras rabim is chatzi nechama. That if you have the majority of people are mourning, that in itself is some type of consolation. I heard up a modern expression that's nechamas tipshim. You know, that's people that are not that smart feel happy that many other people are mourning. But there is a certain type of help by knowing that everyone is going through the same thing together. And that on some level, minimizes the mourning feeling. But when a woman is mourning the death of her husband, this is a very individual mourning. It's only that family is mourning. The mourning is heavier. So people have the mitzvah of participating in the mourning. And it helps a little bit, but still it's a specific avelus. So it would make sense to say that there, getting engaged is aser. And in conclusion, just like we started off, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda are both equally very lenient. That you don't need 90 days, not only not from engagement to marriage, but even if she was married to the first husband, and now she's getting engaged, and engagement is the first step of a new marriage, she could get engaged, according to them, within the 90 days. The only thing you cannot do is from one marriage to another marriage. We'll stop over here and the Mitzvah Hashem continue tomorrow.